Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with the Director General of the Standards Association of Zimbabwe, Dr. Gadzikwa. Dr. Gadzikwa, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you very much, Trevor, for having me.
We're excited to have an opportunity to speak about the Zimbabwe Standards Association or Standards Association of Zimbabwe, because I think your organization has eyes all across the nation in terms of what standards are all about. You have celebrated 63 years being in business. When you look back, do you think you've been able to achieve the things that you were set up to achieve?
Indeed, Trevor, the Standards Association, SAZ, has had a very long history in this country, and I'm very excited that we are, celebrating 63 years of committed service to standardization, and I can safely say we have executed our mandate to the best of our ability for what we were established to do.
Tell us in a nutshell, what does the Standards Association of Zimbabwe do? What do you do?
Essentially, SAZ is the national standards body of Zimbabwe. It is the body that is mandated by the government of Zimbabwe to establish standards and also to promote the widespread use of standards, and also to educate the public in terms of what is the true value of standards in the economy and how standardization is linked to business. So, in a nutshell, I would say, as a national standards body, our role is to make sure that everyone in this country, including SMEs, large corporates, are making use of standards in the day-to-day operations. It's not some fluffy thing. It's standardization is the language of business. It allows you to correct, some of the production problems that you have. It allows you to unlock value, and it also makes you able to export your products because the world out there understands the language of standardization.
You're saying it's not a fluffy thing. So it's not a nice to have.
Yes.
It's being done for the public good, for society's good. Could you unpack that for us?
Yes, it's correct to say that we are a public good organization in the sense that we are not a regulator, although we are perceived as a regulator. We are a public good organization, one that is established to ensure that the relevant standards are made available to our producers, and also the facilities that we have are also made available to the various suppliers, producers, SMEs, corporates, state-owned enterprises. And basically, people need to understand that as a national standards body, we are there to support business. And we are also the moral eyes of society in terms of ensuring that the consumers have an independent body that confirms or verifies the quality of products that are sold on the market.
Let's look at the type of work that you do. I mean, looking at the year 2017, you published 122 standards. You certified 8 new products. You certified 17 organizations in Zimbabwe, Malawi, and South Africa. Are you happy with that amount of work? Could you do more? And what is stopping you from doing more?
I would say 2017 was indeed a year where we took stock of the work that we're doing in Zimbabwe. And one of the things that we realized is that there's much more work for us to do in relation to the size of the market and the potential. We believe that there's more that the Standards Association can do to reach out, especially to the SMEs, because I think you are aware that generally SMEs are now driving business today. So those numbers, in as much as they may appear to be large, but relative to the size of the market, I believe that there's still more that we can do.
So, what help do you give to SMEs to be better positioned rather, to penetrate the local market and the export market?
Right. So, in answering that question, I'll start with how SAZ is supported to do the work that we do. And that's important because for us to be able to do what we do need support because, as I said before, we are not a regulator, meaning that we are not for profit making, as it were. But the support that we receive is from government through the Standard Development Levy. And this is to enable us to do the work that we do. Government supports us through this levy, 100% in terms of the capex, but we also receive support for recurrent expenditure, and mainly to support SMEs and to support the productive sector, because as you know, Zimbabwe for a long time we were relying on the extractive industry for exports, but now the drive is towards industrialization. But there's a gap, and the gap is how do we support our SMEs to make sure that they're part and parcel of this economy, transformation of this economy.
So, to be specific, how do you support the SMEs? What exactly do you do?
Okay, so one of the products that we have is standardization. The very essence of a national standards body is to establish standards. So we do provide standards. We sell standards to to SMEs, to the private sector, to public sector, etc. So we sell standards. We also provide training to the community. We also provide testing because, for instance, if you are producing peanut butter, you'd want to know whether the peanut butter is meeting the requirements of the standard. But the most important issue is to raise awareness. How we support them is to raise awareness and make them aware that standards do exist, whether they use them or not. But we'd like more and more of these SMEs to use them. So we raise awareness through trainings, through providing testing facilities in our laboratories. We are also making sure that we certify our products so that by the time the product is on the shelf, the SME is able to confirm that my product is fit for purpose. It can be sold, it is safe for consumption on the market.
Let's go to your national mandate, which is a very heavy lifting stuff. Your mandate is to improve safety, encourage innovation, and preserve the environment. Those are three big heavy lifting stuff. Do you mind talking to us about those issues?
Absolutely. Let's talk about safety. The issue around safety, there are statutory inspections, for instance. In this country, there's a number of organizations, mainly engineering firms, who are required to be registered with the Factories Inspectorate of NASA, because and also the mining sector. As you know, there are high risk areas like mines. A lot of things happen in mines, and there's need for these organizations to be registered with regulators like NASA, like EMA, because of the nature of their work. And so the element of safety is critical to the work of standardization. So we provide what we call occupational health and safety benchmarks or standards, which organizations like factories, engineering firms, foundries, and mines have to comply with these minimum benchmarks for safety. And then so this is one area that I believe that there's a lot of work that we can still do in terms of the safety element, because we want to avoid unnecessary deaths that can happen, for instance, in mines. As you know, we've got a lot of artisanal mines who've lost their lives just by the sheer accidents that are happening in those areas. So one of the things we're doing and talking to our policymakers is to make sure that they reference some of these minimum benchmarks or standards at law.
Interesting that you bring in the artisanal miners, because it's a big issue, particularly in the Midlands. And when you see the safety aspect of it and the environmental damage, do you have a role to play in making sure that there's order within that aspect of our economy?
Well, one of the things we're doing, Trevor, is that we're talking to the regulators and we would like them to make use of standards and reference them at law. In other words, to come up with a framework, especially for artisanal miners, because especially in the gold mining sector, I'm sure you can see the growth. There's exponential growth in that area, but then there's also the element of safety that we need to make sure that our miners are safe. And we are talking to them, trying to convince them to reference the standards at law. You see, when a standard is produced, it is voluntary. But once it is referenced at law, it becomes mandatory. In other words, there's an enforcement agent who's going to come to make sure that these benchmarks are being met.
So the referencing and having it put in law, how many of these standards that you've worked on fall under a regulator and can be policed?
I would say about 20% of our standards are referenced at law. Again, it's a question of making this aware to our regulators, because some of our regulators may not be aware of the existence of standards or international benchmarks. But fortunately, in Zimbabwe, we are fortunate in that we do have a number of regulators who've made use of our standards. In fact, they even participate in the formulation of some of those standards because they would like to see us protecting the environment, which you spoke about earlier on. They would also like to make sure that we protect human lives and that we do not lose unnecessary lives as we are, going by, our normal business.
20% is low, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't we be aiming for a number higher than 20%?
Maybe to answer that question, I'll speak to you a little bit about, I'll unpack the WTO rules.
Thank you.
The WTO rules say that standards, by their very nature, are voluntary. Okay. And technical regulations are mandatory. So it is sometimes not necessary to enforce everything. But where there's a high risk, then there's need for you to reference standards at law. Mm-hmm. So what we are promoting in my organization is self-regulation, making people understand that if you do the right thing, if you self-regulate, you will stay in business. And in fact, you will grow your business, either through the local market, selling your products in the cities, or even exporting out of the continent globally. So self-regulation is the first line of defense, as it were, and then regulation is the second line of defense, because there's also a danger of over-regulating, and we would like to ensure that we don't over-regulate our market, because a regulation is only as good as it can be enforced, as you know. So I think the challenge for us is continuously talking about it. It is a journey without a finishing line. We have to continue preaching and talking about standards at every platform that we have, because as you can imagine, it's not only for products, it's also for services as well.
Talk to me about the environmental aspect of this. Factories releasing unsafe, hazardous chemicals, fluids, liquids into our rivers, and many other things that corporates do, which damage the environment, the pollution and so forth. How big is that an issue for you as Zimbabwe Standards Association, and how involved are you to ensure that there is some form of order in our economy as far as that is concerned?
That is an extremely important question, because I'm sure we are all aware that the issue of climate change has become a reality and we cannot ignore it. And Zimbabwe is not immune to this problem of climate change. So the regulators have actually made it their business to make sure that they up their game in terms of raising the benchmarks in terms of compliance, so that in terms of sustainability and SDGs, we need to also work towards meeting our obligations as a country. Zimbabwe is part of the global village, and we are also in discussions with the rest of the world in terms of what our obligations are. So quite a lot has to be done. And the second part of your question is in relation to what we are doing. We have environmental management standards, which standards are, in some instances referenced at law. As we know, we do have EMA, Environmental Management Agency, And we are part of those people that are talking to the regulators so that we work with them. We facilitate the work of regulators. We work very closely with regulators, the various ministries that are involved, and also the agencies who are also mandated to enforce law.
I love the talk about self-regulation and the motivation and the incentive for corporates and individuals to self-regulate in business. It's good for businesses, but it's good for society. But in an environment where we are right now, which, for lack of a better word, people are cutting costs to enhance the bottom line. You see chaos all over the place and so forth. Is self-regulation working right now?
Well, self-regulation, let me talk about leadership, because I believe that leadership has got three facets. Basically, standards, okay, culture. We need to make sure that the culture is right. And, third component of all of this is making sure that we are convinced, the conviction that, we're doing the right thing. So when you talk about self-regulation, is it working? Well, I would say to some degree it is working, because otherwise we would not be in existence as SAZ. Because what we are doing is moral suasion. We are talking to people and convincing them that you need this for your business to stay in business. In fact, sometimes I joke and say that we are a de facto regulator, because if you're not implementing standards, your consumers will shun your products. They'll simply won't buy. And we have not gone around with a stick to say, use our standards, but the consumer has to be educated and, made aware of their rights in terms of, the right to safety in consuming good products, and the right to knowledge, disclosure. Very often it's all about disclosure. What is on the label. These are standards. The minimum benchmarks also talk about labeling standards. Are you disclosing what is in a product, for instance? Do your consumers know what they're eating? So self-regulation, I think it's still in its infancy, but it is growing.
I'll push back there. Do the consumers know their rights? Do they look at these labels? And I'm a bit, I don't think I've got the answer to that, but what do you think? Do the consumers know their rights? Do they take their rights seriously? Do they push back as far as when companies are not meeting the rights that they expect from companies in terms of products that they produce?
Yeah. Consumerism in Zimbabwe and in Africa in general is still growing. Consumerism is basically consumers demanding their rights, saying that I demand a safe product, I demand a quality product. Very often it's about price. But you only need to see what happens to a company when you produce a poor quality product. Your product is removed from the shelf. And it's not removed by a regulator. It is removed by the consumer, who refuses to buy the product again. And we've seen this time and again. And very often, as an organization, the consumer will come to us and call us and say, is this product certified? We're seeing this product on the shelf, but I am convinced that it's not certified.
So consumers do actually call you
and
ask you these questions?
Absolutely. They call us all the time. Sometimes they find things in the, for instance, it can be a beverage, things floating in the water or whatever. They'll call us and say, please, can you confirm that this product is still, meeting your requirements of standards? And we can give that assurance. So yes, it is still in its infancy, but it's growing. And I think our work now is to make sure that people recognize the seal of quality. When a product is certified, people will recognize the seal of quality, that an independent body has actually tested that product and has given assurance. We've put our neck on the block, as it were, to say, you can consume this product, it is safe.
October the 14th has been set aside as World Standards Day. I raise this question because in my mind I'm asking myself, how much of your time do you spend educating the consumers about their rights. What is the theme of this year's World Standards Day, and why was that theme chosen?
Okay, so the 14th of October is our World Standards Day. It's a day that is commemorated by the whole world. There are 164 members of ISO around the world, and my organization SAZ is a member of ISO, full member of ISO at an international level. We are a member of ASO on the continent, and the theme.
And ASO stands for
the African Organization for Standardization.
Right.
Right. So the theme for this year was, is video standards set a global stage. Essentially, the world is awakening to the realization that it is important for us to tell our own story, but we need to tell our own story with quality, making sure that the quality of video recording, the messaging, the content is up to standard. Because if we don't tell our story well, the rest of the world is going to tell a very bad story.
Right.
So I find that this theme is very exciting for me because, at last we've realized that we need to step up our game, raise our standards in terms of the quality of programming, the quality of, especially in the digital era. We're now in the digital era. The fourth industrial revolution, is talking about digitalization and the transformation of the continent so that Africa can, like the rest of the world, make use of digitalization and improve recording, improve video messaging to the rest of the world, improve the quality of content so that as we are sending our messages out there, people are understanding the real story of Zimbabwe and Africa as a whole.
Excellent. One of the things that you do is to make available to producers and consumers laboratory facilities for testing of manufactured goods, raw materials, and calibration equipment. Are you happy with the way the manufacturers and producers are coming to you and using these facilities?
Yes, I'm happy with the way they've embraced the services that we offer, which are quite comprehensive. By the way, all the services that we offer are accredited, meaning that the results are tested once, accepted everywhere. And that's really important because if we are going to be reaching out to an export market, we don't want our results to be challenged, be it whether it's training is internationally recognized, if it's certification, it is recognized, the testing, inspection, all our services are recognized internationally, so our results cannot be challenged. Whether we are happy or not is a question of, I suppose, to what extent our services are being used. What we've seen a recent trend where, some business persons believe that they can do their own in-house testing, which is fair and fine. You can still set up your own in-house laboratory, but the beauty and of using an external body is that you're having an accredited facility to confirm the work that you are doing. And this is really important because self-declaration sometimes does not work, especially when you're going to be exporting or selling your product to a third party. They're more inclined to believe a result that is done by an independent body rather than you testing your own and approving your own results. And so that trend is something that we hope that it can be dealt with through the national quality policy, which I believe is in its advanced stage now. And the national quality policy is basically a policy that government is coming up with, which is going to define who is supposed to do what, so that we don't end up having conflict in terms of our operations.
I see you in newspapers, with companies celebrating being given an ISO certificate. And I always ask myself, when Eve is gone, do these people remain being as exacting in implementing those standards? And I think the question I'm asking you is, do you have authority to monitor compliance to follow up that people still do what made them get those certificates?
Yes, indeed. In fact, the certificates that we issue to our clients who meet the requirements of the standards, be it quality management systems, environmental management systems, occupational health and safety, food safety, etc. These certificates have a 3-year validity period. And yes, I'll hand a certificate today, but I always remind the client to say this is not a life certificate. It's got 3 years validity period, and during that period, we will be visiting your offices every so often to monitor your, consistency, so that you continue to improve your system. The whole idea of giving a certificate is only as good as a piece of paper on the wall. What we want is to make sure that you are actually implementing it on the ground. So we'll continue to be, watching you, monitoring and auditing your business so that you are maintaining your standards during the 3-year validity period. And then after that, if we are happy, you can be recertified to the standard. And this also allows you to continuously improve and step up, raise your bar, as it were, in terms of quality standards.
Have you had companies that receive this certification, and because they are not exerting themselves enough, they lose the compliance?
Absolutely. We've on some occasions had to withdraw the certificate. If we find that our customer or our client is not upholding the standard, we do reserve the right to retain the certificate. It has happened on some occasions. I can't say on many occasions, but on some occasions we've seen that happening. And also, just to say, Trevor, that the role of SAZ is not to punish our clients, but is to help them to do the right thing. And this is where the moral suasion, to help them to do the right thing, to help them to improve, to help them to understand that if they do well in terms of standardization of their business, they will be in business for a long time, and they will continue to gain the respect of the market.
Talk to me now about the issue around testing of something which I love very much. And I always look at a sausage and say, does Eve know what gets into this sausage? Should I bring the sausage to you? Does the manufacturer bring the sausage to you? Or does Eve go to the manufacturer of sausage and say, hey, what do you put in here?
This is where standards get very interesting.
Right.
So, when you're buying a sausage or a freeze-it or maputi or dori or whatever it is that you're purchasing off the shelf, very often you don't know what's in that product, right? And this is where the standards become important, because when the mark is there on the container, you are assured that this product is safe. But the issues that you're raising in terms of what is inside of that sausage, it's a question of disclosure. And I say this because I'm sure you remember the story of the horse meat a few years ago, and horse burgers and all of that. It's really a question of disclosure. I think it's very important that producers realize that, we've got educated customers out there, and they've got the right to know what they're eating. It's not just a question of selling a burger and calling it a burger, but they have a right to know what sort of burger they're eating. So it's really a question of disclosure. And this is why I keep talking about the labeling standards. To what extent are we making use of labeling standards to promote our business? And by the way, packaging and labeling has become real business around the world. Africa is still learning about these issues, but it's important that we make use of standards so that we package our products correctly and we label them correctly as well, because it adds value to your business. It also adds more value to your brand if you are disclosing the correct information on the label.
But my maputi and my phrases are not labeled. They don't have an expiry date. Do I bring them to you for you to test for me? What do I do?
As an individual, you can bring your products and we can test them for you. But as I said, foodstuffs are regulated by the Ministry of Health. and traded products are regulated by Ministry of Industry and Commerce. So this is, the hand-to-glove work that we're doing with the regulators. We are talking to the regulators to say certain products may be high risk, and when they're high risk, they need to be regulated. Our job ends where we provide you a standard of how to produce a product, how to package your product, how to label your product. The work of the regulator, on the other hand, is to enforce if that standard is referenced at law.
Okay. You have you are the past president of the African Organization of Standardization, which is a very big role that you're playing. Are we making progress as a continent in terms of standardization, uniform standards to help us with trading amongst ourselves and interfacing with the rest of the world? Are we making any progress there?
So, Trevor, with the coming in of the Continental Free Trade Area, we all know that 54 countries have actually signed up, and 27, I believe, have ratified. What does this mean? It means there's opening up of markets. So the challenge that we have as standardizers is how do we increase inter-Africa trade? One of the issues that that we've been working on quite successfully is to harmonize standards, because for Zimbabwe to be able to trade with Kenya, with South Africa, with Botswana, with Malawi, the challenge that we faced is we had a myriad of standards and conformity assessment regimes. What am I talking about? I'm talking about there's standards, there's accreditation, there's conformity assessment, there's metrology. Those are big words, right? These are TBTs, or technical barriers to trade. And if we don't get to the bottom of that, it will mean that Africa will continue to have challenges in trading with itself. I think we are aware that in Africa, I think the trade, inter-Africa trade is only about 17%, whereas in Europe, for instance, it's way up there, 70%, and we know that Asia, I think it's around 50%. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the inter-Africa trade. Are we doing well? I think so far we've done brilliantly. We've done quite a lot of work under the, ASO, the African Organization for Standards, by harmonizing standards, and we are focusing mainly on food standards, realizing that food can still be exported, across borders, as it were. So we're harmonizing standards. But the other big challenge and hurdle that we still need to navigate and overcome is the harmonization of technical regulations, which are laws. Because every country has its own laws in terms of how they want to protect their consumers from influx of substandard products. So there's a lot of work being done on the continent, and I'm happy to say Zimbabwe, we've actually adopted over 60 of these African regional standards.
That's good to know.
So we can promote our African Zimbabwean products around the continent.
And are we sitting at the table in terms of international best practice and ensuring that we are plugged into what the world is demanding in terms of standardization of products?
We are keeping plugged in. The national standards body, as I mentioned, we are the ISO member at international level, and the ASO level at the continental level, and we also attend expert group meetings on standardization at SADC, at COMESA level. Therefore, we're staying very much in touch with what is happening around the world in terms of standardization. I think the biggest challenge, of course, that we have is we only have so many professionals, and very often they are really inundated with the amount of work that they need to do, in order for us to participate. Because what we don't want, Trevor, is to become standard takers. We want to become standard makers.
Absolutely.
So the standards I'm talking about, the continental standards, we are actually trying to get them to become international standards. So that requires quite a lot of commitment in terms of our professionals, our standardizers who are in Zimbabwe. But so far, I think we've really done ourselves proud as Zimbabwe.
That's good to hear. I always ask people what books they're reading, but I'm been told that with you, I should ask you, you've written a book. What's the book? What is it all about?
Okay, I wrote a book which I launched, I actually published it in 2015, I Dare You to Lead. Um, I think having been at the helm of SAZ, I realized that I was mentoring a lot of people, and I still do mentor a lot of people in terms of leadership.
You are a certified coach.
Yes, I'm a certified coach
You are a
practitioner.
marketer. You are a lot of things, but tell us about your book.
Okay, so in writing this book, what I had in my mind was to put on paper my thoughts in terms of leadership, and I was of the belief that I needed to give back, to especially the youth who are coming up, and they're also trying to break that glass ceiling, and so I wrote this book, I Dare You to Lead. It's quite a small book, but I believe quite an important book in terms of the issue of leadership, because I felt that there is a gap in terms of leadership. It's all well and good having standards, but if you don't have the leadership capacity to make use of those standards, there's a problem. So I wrote this book thinking mainly about how I can give back to youth and to women especially. I'm unapologetic about women. I'm a strong promoter of women and youth.
This show loves women, by the way, and what women do, and which is why you're here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'll continue doing this work on the continent, and on the continent, I was fortunate and privileged to have that big role of leading Africa as the first woman president of the African Organization for Standardization since 1977.
Wow, what an achievement!
So it gave me the confidence to say I've got something to offer, and I'm still ready to offer my support to the upcoming leaders who would want to be in the position and the privileged position that I've been in over the past decade to lead this organization, but not only this organization, but the continent in terms of standardization.
So you mentor young women wanting to get into business. Mm-hmm. What should they do to come to be able to be noticed by you and be mentored by you?
My advice to young people, and especially women, is, my type of mentorship is not a formal classroom setup where you sit there and I say this is what you're supposed to do, and it's basically how we engage on a more informal level. You calling me to say, look, I've got this issue that I'm dealing with. Can you support me? I've got certain goals. How do I navigate? And this is where the coaching comes in. How do I navigate so that I can, attain my goals?
Dr. Eve Gadzikwa, thank you so much. The work that you do is important for the country. It is important for the economy. It is important for us being able to trade with the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. And I love your passion about leadership, leading as far as standardization is concerned. We thank you so much for coming in conversation with Trevor.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Don't want to miss out on these insightful conversations? Subscribe to our YouTube channel.